triggers and effects. I have some theories on these, but I only really know one trigger, and that's the trigger that worked for me, which was following the method of meditation in The Secret of the Golden Flower. I'm able to extrapolate to some degree with other people once I hear what their the causes are. But if they say they were walking down the street and Kundalini just hit, I'm really at a loss.
I have a lot of impressions about the different ways that Kundalini will activate, and sometimes it is spontaneous, though usually in a person that would have it happen that spontaneously, they have some history of activities that would have made them vulnerable to an awakening. It varies greatly. I call many of the kinds of awakenings I've seen portals. Write about that quite a bit in my books, especially my new book that's coming out in the spring. And I believe that there's just many portals to awakening because we're all different people. We have different backgrounds, different exposures, and different, you could say, vulnerabilities to energy. But I also want to point out before we get into that there's also an experience that yogis call prana tattva, which is basically an energetic release, shaking, looks a little bit like Kundalini, but it's temporary. It's usually a release under stress or for some other reason, like when people are in shock sometimes. And sometimes you just have somewhat of an opening during, say, meditation, where you feel energy moving in your body, or you feel a little bit of vibrating, and it goes up and it comes down, and it doesn't seem to do anything very dramatic, and it goes away, or it only shows up once in a while. And so most people would not consider that a Kundalini awakening, but in the Indian model, it'd just be called prana tattva, or you might call it a chi release in the Chinese systems. Also, Kundalini awakens quite often with people doing qigong, as well as doing yoga or playing around with tantra, doing tantric sexual classes, or it can awaken from people doing energy work, breath work. I've met a number of people who've had awakenings from after a Reiki session, which works with another energy flow in the body, but can occasionally spark the Kundalini arising too in somebody that, let's say, is a long-term meditator. There's also some evidence that people who have had sexual abuse or other kinds of intense physical abuse as children may have had some, you might say, a jarring of the Kundalini energy, and then as soon as they start meditating or doing something else, there can be a very sudden and intense awakening. It's usually very traumatic for them because it brings up repressed sensations from their earlier abuse issues. This is pretty rare, but I have seen it happening. There's just a lot of different times. Yeah, I've even seen people have awakenings in dreams, and something like being in an encounter with a guru or some event, snake, image of a snake, and when they wake up, the energy is just pouring through their bodies.
I edited a book for a well-known French author, the English version. I took the French version and put it into English and published it for a while. It was an OBE book, and she'd written quite a few in France and was successful, very successful author and giving classes. And she talked about the sexual aspect and the Kundalini aspect, having sex in an OBE, and also the Kundalini aspect of an OBE. And we compared a lot of the effects, and it seems to me that an OBE is a subset of Kundalini, because Kundalini is this high energy, and both near-death experiences and and out-of-body experiences are kind of subsets of the overall Kundalini effects.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's something that I noticed. the trigger that worked for me was the golden flower method, and this seems to have quite a parallel with many of the tantric and Tibetan meditation methods. So that's really, unless it's very specific, I like to not say that I experienced that, or to tell people something that may not really resonate with their experience.
Well, there's many different ways that people enter this process. That's for sure. And I think it's easier. The way that I've identified Kundalini with clients over the years is based on the work I did on my doctoral research. When I went and tried to find as many people as I could who appeared to have had awakenings, and I tried to evaluate or chart what were they doing, what was their history, what was their initial experience, and what was the follow-up phenomena they experienced. And I used that to develop a model. And I felt that many people, well, always, it'll start with some initial experience when something dramatic happens that you really feel different. You feel the energy in your body is different. It starts at the base of the spine and moves upward very intensely. Sometimes it starts in the big toe. That's pretty rare, but that's in the spiritual yogic literature. Sometimes in some spiritual systems, the emphasis is on the hara, the center of the body, to activate energy there first. In others, it's on the third eye, and if somebody might have an expansive experience of consciousness shifting, like an out-of-body experience or a dramatic expansion, and then the energy comes up afterwards. And sometimes people have initially, you would call it a heart opening, but a few systems would label that a Kundalini experience too. So it makes it confusing because there's a lot of different things that people have called a Kundalini awakening. But I always look for an initiating event that feels dramatically changing of the person's energy field. And then I developed 7 categories of phenomena that I felt indicated a Kundalini process. These included physical changes, movements of the body that you had no control over, shaking, or maybe waking up at night doing mudras, doing movements with your body, hearing yogic sounds, involuntary activity. Those are called kriyas in the yogic model. Then emotional shifts. There's usually dramatic emotional shifts, and psychic experiences, parapsychological events. I've had people tell me that they couldn't wear a watch, their watch would break, or they couldn't work with their computer, it screwed up. One man even told me when he walked underneath lights, street lights, they would go out. So some people develop kind of a heightened electrical sensitivity. And then spiritual experiences. If they've had a dramatic shift of realization of what their true nature is, or who they are, where they've kind of lost their connection with the separate self or the egoic self. So I look for people to have had experiences in 3 or 4 at least of those categories before I would say, oh, I'm pretty sure this is Kundalini, and not just another kind of energy release or emotional release.
A colleague of mine kept asking me, I was editing her book, and she kept asking me whether what I knew as a Kundalini experience really was. She asked me to authenticate it, and after I heard the story, I told her immediately that's Kundalini. And the story was, or is, that she was working with a coworker, and they had been going out, and they'd worked late on a Saturday, and in her mind they were going to go out and have a good time. And when crunch time came, he kind of just offhandedly said, we're not going out tonight. And she said she started to vibrate, and this energy just went through her body. The fact of being jilted, I mean, she had emotionally invested to such a degree in this situation that when the time came and she was jilted just on the spot like that, she thought that the guy, well, I don't know, we call it going steady or something like that, that she vibrated and the energy went all the way up to her head, and she shook and was unable to speak. And he thought something was wrong with her and asked her, and she couldn't respond. And he finally just fled. He just copped out and left. And I said, that's I think that's just a spontaneous Kundalini event.
What I would say with somebody like that is I would look for the after effects. I would look if there was ongoing, like does she lay in bed at night and her body continues to do involuntary movements? Does she have changes and shifts in consciousness? Is a lot going on for her in the following weeks? I would look for a process to then follow an initial experience. But some people do have an initial kind of dramatic event, and then everything else goes back to normal, and it may stay that way for years. And then they may show up, someone like that might show up 6 months or a couple of years later at a meditation retreat, sit down to meditate, go into their deep stillness, and all of a sudden the explosion is there again, because you could say it's been primed. It's like a priming of the potential of this opening through the spine.
She was a person, or is a person, who was spiritually inclined, starting from a heavy Roman, going to a Roman Catholic school and being indoctrinated and going through that whole heavy nuns, young girls situation. And she had always looked for the spiritual beyond the religious. She knew there was something at a very early age, and had been into Buddhism, had been into different things. And she had several eruptions like that, not stemming exactly from the same event, like the being jilted event. The second time was at an ashram in India, and during a meditation session, and where she just, the same kind of physical sensations. And I think this is kind of ongoing. I don't know exactly whether the after effects were the same, but as you described, but she's such a person, she's so inclined, and she's into so spiritually inclined that it just seems
I would agree. That's what I would look for. If I was evaluating, I would say, oh, with that kind of a history, then it wouldn't surprise me that Kundalini would open. And then here's somebody that's even drawn to go sit in an ashram and meditate. So definitely I would call that a Kundalini opening with that kind of a pattern, looking at the whole kind of story of what they've experienced and what they've longed for. I've found a couple of things that are fairly consistent in Kundalini awakenings. One is that they usually happen during moments of intense concentration. And that could be applicable for, say, when you were doing the golden flower practice. It can be true in a meditation where somebody just is completely focused and the mind is stopped and they're just really in a ready place of stillness. It can happen in a near-death experience where you're very focused. Your mind is not wandering in 5 directions. You're just simply totally present. So there's a lot of, I've seen that real consistent. I even met one man who, he had been doing biofeedback. He was a scientist, a brain scientist, and he was left on a biofeedback machine during, I guess he was a graduate student at the time, and somebody left and just forgot he was there. And he sat in this machine and did this practice for hours. And he had just a full-on opening after a few hours of this, that sustained and really changed his life and his direction of his work. So that's one of the primary factors. Another thing that's very common is like the client you mentioned who has had this longing in their heart since they were a child. I find that many Catholics and also Jewish people come into this process, and I think it's because that longing or that trust in a relationship with something greater than themselves is instilled at a very early age, but the system itself doesn't satisfy it. It just kind of gives you that input, and then very often those are the people that have had really strong inclinations that way that are later turned into other kinds of practices that might open them up more.
A preview type thing.
Yeah, it's like a programming that says, I know there is something greater, but nobody's proven it to me yet. I really want to know.
Well, that was more or less my experience all through, that I went to much more liberal Episcopal boarding schools from the age of 5. So just that fact of being it's not the heavy thing that a Catholic school is, boarding school, or this was a particular run, her thing was particular. Most of the ladies came out of the school as nuns or to some degree, some spiritualized, quote unquote. My trigger was really, I started doing yoga, hatha yoga, from a book. And once again, I didn't have any kind of teacher. And the book was really good, a very good book written by a Chinese guy that I picked up in Washington, D.C. in a secondhand store. Practiced this method, and then it talked about meditation. Across the street from where I was living, there was this guy that had a sign up about hypnosis and learn hypnosis. So I went to a hypnosis class and experienced a couple of some kind of different states, of alpha states, or I don't know exactly what they call them, beta states. And so just by this relaxing hypnosis, either tapes or voice. And then I got in, after that, shortly, I left to live in France and was going through all kinds of crazy changes, because it's a very, very, it was a very open period. There was a center called the American Center on Boulevard Raspail, which just featured all kinds of crazy American musicians, poets, artists, plus there were a lot of other people from different other countries. And it was a very culturally rich moment. And then I got into exploring meditation. I went to a Zen meditation, and I just felt uncomfortable and didn't know what I was supposed to be doing. And I left that after a few sessions. And then I was in this big bookstore on the Rue de Rivoli called Gagliani's. And I ran across this book. Well, somebody gave me this book. And I went to Gagliani's and never found anything, but I met this girl there at Gagliani's. And my intent was to seduce her. She was an American girl. And she had told me she'd been through a macrobiotic thing, and she had to go back to the States. She was out of, I don't know. Anyway, the next day she showed up at my apartment and gave me the book, The Secret of the Golden Flower, and told me it contains the secret of life. And then she kissed me on the cheek and left, and I never saw her again. And I put the book away and continued my various debaucheries for the next year. And one day I just picked it up and I just read it all through, and it didn't make entire sense to me. but I just said, well, it seems like it's a manual, just like the manual for my vacuum cleaner or for my camera or whatever. And so I started to just sit in a position, and I was able to sit in the lotus position. And I knew that breathing was making the breathing regular was the objective. And that's what I tried to work on. And I had trouble with that. And then I started walking all over Paris, just counting in beats of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold 1, 2, 3, 4. And these were timed to my paces. Exhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold 1, 2, 3, 4. Start over. And that helped me so that when I went back to sit the next morning, eventually I was able to just forget about that. And I wasn't it also helped me to overcome the 10,000 voices, as the Chinese call them, the 10,000 things, the inner mental chatter, because I would count 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, that whole series of counting, which you could do 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. You could do any variation as long as it was regular. And I did that regularly in the morning, and I was able to, I've never been able to concentrate to that extent, but I was able to master the concentration so that everything disappeared. And then at times I felt like I was the room, and it was like everything something was breathing me. I wasn't breathing. And it worked. And after a while, I felt this buildup of energy in the lower belly, or I felt this kind of roiling effect. And I thought, what's that? I wasn't quite sure what it was. But then after a few days, I noticed that it had the properties of direction, that it was spinning like up the front and down the back. And that clicked with the whole notion of the backward flowing method in The Secret of the Golden Flower, which I had never really understood what it was. And it just came to me that I needed to reverse that energy if I was going to accomplish this whole method. If it was going to work for me, I needed to reverse it. And I knew I could do it, but I also knew that I would not be able to reverse it, that I was stuck with it. And so I was really leaping off a cliff, and I decided I'm going to do it. So I sat down and simply told the energy to reverse, and I could visualize it reversing down the front and up the back. And incrementally, bit by bit, day by day, it would go up just a little further up the spine until it went around, and then that hit the third eye. But so that was, I think, it seems to be, there a lot of people have told me that they've used similar type of triggers in meditation, but it took me over a year to get that whole process of just because my breathing was not only irregular, but it was also somewhat was asynchronous because of this splinter incident and deformation of my body. So I had to accomplish really two things at the same time: make my breathing regular and start this process of repairing my body.
That's an amazing story. I want to say just a couple of words about The Secret of the Golden Flower, since you've been alluding to it so much, and I know you've written books about it. It's a very ancient Chinese text, probably from thousands of years of verbal teachings, and then a very, very old text. And there's there's probably a lot of versions of this practice, but there's two that are in English that have been major books in esoteric teachings. And the first was by Richard Wellham back in 1926, and that's the text that you were given at that time. The more recent one is by Thomas Cleary, and he has a different way of interpreting some of the chapters or some of the parts of the golden flower and how to use it and what it means. So if any of our listeners are interested, both of those texts would have a different perspective, but coming from the same essence. I just did a class on the golden flower using Clary's text with my students here in Ashland, and it's very poetic. It's very, it's full of ancient Chinese illusions or metaphors. And basically the golden flower is the essence, the true essence, the true nature. If you have had a lot of exposure to Buddhism or Zen, you can see where the golden flower would have been a very foundational text about meditation, at least in the way that Clary's translated it. Which appears to me to be a lot about the fact that our consciousness goes out all the time, and we're always preoccupied with the world, and the turning inward, in my interpretation of Clary's book, is a turning in of awareness into the inner, deeper self, and bringing it down into the heart or the core of our stillness, our presence, and that by turning all of the awareness, all of the presence inward, we stimulate the activation of our true nature, which is basically the golden flowers kind of a metaphor for our true connection with source, with the sacred, with what we truly are. And so it can be, the book can be used in a more energetic model of turning the energy around, more like a qigong, a reverse qigong type of practice of the circulating of the breath, or it can be used more as it's come to be done in a meditation practice of turning the attention away from all of the externals and into the deeper part of our true nature. And that can be, and that comes, it's kind of a Taoist model, and it is a Taoist model, and it can be also a very profound opportunity to awaken using it in that more subtle way, as well as using it as the circulation of the energy, which has been such a powerful issue for you. Which is just another way of saying there's a lot of different ways that this opening can happen. Your practice that you were describing too reminds me a lot of some of the yogic practices, particularly in Kundalini yoga, where you work with the breath and you work with concentration on the base of the spine. And instead of the circulation in yoga, the idea is to put the attention on the base of the spine after much training of balancing, harmonizing the breath. Learning to put attention at the base and bring energy up from the base through the very center, called sushumna in the yogic model, through the center of the spine, up through each of the chakras, and up through and around through the top of the head. So we can say that these ancient peoples in both the Chinese and the Buddhist, in the Hindu worlds, somehow evolved, understood, or perhaps that they were channeled. Somehow they got a hold of these methodologies for transformation and for increasing the consciousness within themselves, which, as we mentioned in our earlier session, some people would say is part of an evolutionary process. It's like they discovered methodologies to enhance the evolution of consciousness. I think that Kundalini, too, if you've studied at all any of the ancient indigenous tribes, there were often drumming and rituals created to raise energy in the community itself. And you can look at anthropological reports that describe this, where the energy is raised very, very high, and then people go into altered states. And in those altered states, they're able to get direction or insight related to the tribal life. So it was more of a communal thing. So this understanding of the primal energy and its power to provide guidance and transformation has probably is very many thousands of years old. And it's just that we've lost connection with our bodies so much in our modern societies. We've learned to really only value the intellect or be overrun by our emotions rather than working directly with the body. And I think some of that is a problem because of Christianity and the models that have come forth that have become very, I know I was raised Catholic too, and you really separate the body from anything spiritual. They're considered not connected to one another in any meaningful way. And in fact, you're supposed to repress any physiological feelings. And yet, for me, when I had my initial Kundalini arising, I had been a meditator for 15 years. I'd had many opening experiences in meditation, blissful and shifts. But I never realized there was a connection with the body until I watched somebody doing a form of breath work. And I could see when he was working with this person that it was a spiritual experience. And so I went to him, and this was a man who is no longer doing this kind of work, but he had developed a form of breath work he called radiance breath work. And I went to him and said, I just want to remove whatever's in the way of a direct connection with God. I know I can see how that could happen. And he worked with me, and I was doing intense breathing while he was working on my body. And afterwards, about an hour later, when I was sitting in a classroom, my energy activated, and it just started moving up and roll after roll after roll. And then I went into a little meditation room that was in the school where I was at, which was a transpersonal college, fortunately. So there was a space allowing for this kind of phenomena. And we had been doing a lot of other kinds of energy work in the classes there. And I went into this little meditation room and just sat for hours in this state of expansion and energy flowing. And so that was how it initiated for me. But I don't think it would have happened if I hadn't had all those years of meditation. And I think it might have been more difficult if I hadn't been in an environment where I knew what it was and trusted it. I never had any anxiety about it. The only time, and then I started doing my doctoral research. I was just on the verge of writing a dissertation and decided to use this for a subject. And the only time I ever felt any fear was when I read Gopi Krishna's book. And he was having such a terrible time that I asked myself, maybe I'm not really experiencing Kundalini because it's not that terrible. And that night, I woke up in the middle of the night and I heard a voice, and it said, "This is really Kundalini. We're just taking it easy on you." And then after that, I just never thought about it again. I just embraced it completely. And it ended up actually directing the rest of my life, all of my professional career. Everything just came together after that because the dissertation moved me into this as a field. Never would I have ever thought that. I was in my early 40s at the time. I had 3 teenage kids. I was not real young like you were. You were young, really young man when it happened for you. And so I would have never in the previous 40 years have ever imagined this is the work I'd end up doing. I wouldn't have even have had a definition for it. But it's like I always thought of it as the goddess. Kundalini is also visioned as a goddess in the yogic system. I just always thought of it, just took me over and just channeled my life in a particular direction. And I think that happens for a lot of people. Our life is really turned around, and we never know what doors it's going to open. So that was kind of my initial awakening. And I had many, many energetic phenomena for years after. But in myself, I would say, and I think it's common, is that at first there was waking up at night with the body doing a lot of jerking and shaking and vibrating and sometimes blissful. And then that calmed down after a while. I also was doing a lot of breath work. I went on to do a lot of clearing of my psychological issues and my anything that was going on that I felt needed clearing. So I kept doing breath work treatments as with therapists. And after about 2 or 3 years, it just became like a little vibration in my body. It stopped being this rough shaking and waking me up in the middle of the night. It just becomes like something that's always there that you can feel, and you can drop into it, and it becomes kind of blissful. So that's how it's been for me. And now that I'm getting older, I don't know whether I've just got adapted to it or it's calmed down more. I don't feel it as much unless I invite it, but I can easily tune into it. And if I wish to, I don't feel a strong drive for that, but I'm just sharing this because a lot of people that call me, they want to know how long is this going to last, or what's going to happen next, or how is this going to be this way forever? And certainly in my experience, it changes greatly over the years. And I think if you trust it and you learn more about it and you see it as a significant opportunity in your life to let go of anything that's in the way of your freedom or your openness to life, that it calms down and it becomes very happy, like you're glad it's there. You're not wishing it away at all. So maybe you'd like to say something about how it's unfolded for you over all these years.
Well, unlike Gopi Krishna, there were a lot of, well, let's say there were a lot of similarities to begin with in terms of the way he approached meditation as a kind of solitary entity or solitary practitioner. That was very similar to my approach. But the way the method, I think I used a little, I don't know if he used a method, but I know I certainly did. And I think as I look back on it, almost immediately, the method took care of the pain and discomfort that he went through. Because once I commanded the breath to change direction, and it started to climb the spine, it was not thought up or forced up the spine. It was what I call drawn up the spine. In other words, the consciousness or the conscious energy was doing that. And so everything went up the right channel. Now, to preface that, as my practice wound down, I went through 2 weeks with not eating, not even drinking. I'd take a solitary sesame seed and it would send this energy through me like just a kind of like thunder. And the last week I was unable to sleep. I couldn't sleep. It was just building up. And then when I finally, and just I mean, I was getting close to panic because I didn't know what was going to happen. I knew something was going to happen because not eating for 2 weeks and feeling all this energy, and I'd walk up the hills, and I was in the south of France all day long, and just nothing would tire me. And so I became desperate. I thought, well, I'll go down to the town. I only had a mobilette. That was my means of transportation. I'll buy a bottle of whiskey and go to the hospital, and they'll take me up to the American hospital in Paris. And maybe, and then I thought, no, that's crazy. I can't. That's stupid. And so I had this friend that lived in a village up in the mountains above me, and he said, if you ever need anything, come up here. And he was the only person that I spoke about this to any degree that seemed interested and wanted to learn more. And I never spoke to anybody else because the curtain would fall, and I could see that they thought, oh, it's all in your head, he's nuts or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. And so I decided, it was like it was late evening, and I took my mobilette up this windy French mountainside road. And at one point I thought, I'm just going to go straight, just over the cliff, just, sail off to. And I got there, and I told him, because I told him something's going to happen. And I said, it's happening. And so he took me up to this, they had another room, and we sat facing each other in the lotus position. And he started to glow. This was not a spiritual guy. He was a geologist. And he started to glow and vibrate. I mean, and pulsate, this glow around him. And then he came up across the room and knocked me on the forehead 3 times, and then left the room, and I lay down, and that's when Kundalini just came all at once, and it went through to the third eye. The next morning, everything was fine. There was no like residual pain or discomfort like Gopi Krishna, no years of trying to get the energy going up the right circuit. And yeah, I mean, that was.
That's amazing. Did he have anything to say about that? Did he know what he was doing?
He didn't know. He didn't.
He just followed an instinct.
The next morning, or after I woke up, I probably slept for about 24 hours. And he and his wife just took care of me for the next 4 months. And I didn't even go back to my place because I was so weakened at the beginning. That energy was all working into rebuilding and re-engineering, refurbishing starting with the body. And I was desperately trying to understand. I wrote a few letters I wrote one to my father trying to explain what the hell was happening with me. And but it was true. It was like one of those things where I wasn't during this whole period, I wasn't hallucinating or anything like that. I mean, if I walked up the mountain, I'd see a tree. It didn't change forms or anything like that. Cars were cars. And this experience, I mean, it was almost like something came through him to me. And the timing of it was so perfect. I got up there like probably 45 minutes before the event was going to happen, and all that negativity just like left me at that point. Now, to the subject of the Secret of the Golden Flower, the current book I'm writing is I use Wilhelm, but I also compare the two, but not to rule or to decide or make any kind of on who's right or who's wrong, because what I do is I compare both of them to my experience, my actual experience, because as far as I know, neither Wilhelm or Baines or Jung or Cleary actually practiced the method. So what I'm doing is saying the real arbiter of truth, I don't know, is the method itself, and the triggers, the way the triggers performed and the effects, and saying in this statement there's Cleary and there's Wilhelm, and there's a disagreement here, and here's where my actual experience came in. So I'm kind of trying to measure it against trying to be as objective as possible to measure it against my experience. What I've found, however, is that Wilhelm and to a degree Jung, even though his whole thing is a little bit convoluted because he has this notion of animus and anima, and there's a lot of terminology. It's excess terminology. Is that it seems to me that Cleary is never comfortable with the idea of sexual sublimation. And Wilhelm is, and it seems that and Gopi Krishna, in a comment that he made on a short review of The Secret of the Golden Flower, said that it is very clear it's a manual of sexual sublimation, and which I quote in some of my books, because I think it's a really important issue that I believe that, and somebody has to disprove it, that every Kundalini awakening, whether it's deliberate through a long meditation process or just walking down the street spontaneous, is keyed to some degree of a leakage or a deliberate drawing up of sexual energy. It's either a leakage, some kind of energy has to precipitate that, that kind of completely alien effects on the body. And when the book is done, I'll have that clearly written out, because it's something that's very hard to just talk about, because it's so interlocked with the terminology that they all use, the differences of terminology, like the conscious and the primal spirit. Well, Cleary has different names for those two things, which are prime movers in human ontology and cosmology and the method itself. That they're not only teaching you how to the ancient Chinese, let's say that they're not around to write, so we have all these intermediaries, but their thing, the ancient Chinese, who you rightly say that it's a very old oral tradition codified into a written form in the 3rd century AD. And when the truth is somewhere between somebody like me working on this in the 20th and 21st century, and those Chinese back in prehistory, probably, that had developed this method and passed it on orally. And then we have these layers and I'm trying to cut through those layers in my book and say, okay, this obviously makes sense because it resonates with what I experienced. And I'm not trying to set myself up. There are other people that have tried the method both as I taught it and who it's been taught by other very closely aligned traditions.
Mm-hmm. I want to just add a little bit about the sexuality that in the Indian Kundalini science, it's really understood or believed that until in all humans, the coiled Kundalini at the base of the spine is the energy that stimulates life. It's the procreative energy. So that energy is alive in everybody in terms of our ability to procreate, both the sexual drive and the life force that enters the new life of the fetus. So it's believed to be in its latent state. That's its work in a sense there. But when it opens, and it's just below the sexual organs, the area where it's been locked in, then it moves up and it moves through the body. And many systems, particularly yogic systems, do encourage celibacy and the suppression of the sexual drive. My understanding is a lot of it's been because the energy is wanting to move up, and the pranic energy that one releases sexually goes downward. It's a downward flow sexual release. So that's why the classical tantric practices are about stimulating that energy and moving it up through the center of the spine and into the brain, rather than letting it release in a sexual act. But I don't think that it's always essential for spiritual awakening or enlightenment, because I have known people in other traditions, such as Kabbalah or Sufi traditions, who have had spiritual full-on spiritual awakenings that included energy without doing the sexual sublimation. Also in the Buddhist tradition, many of the teachers are married and engaged, have children, have sexual activity. And that's always been true. And in fact, in the Sufi tradition, very often the leadership of the community is passed on to the oldest son. So every system has not, at least they haven't preached sublimation. But what I also believe is that during this process, which is so intense, there will be times when the sexual drive just disappears because all the energy and all the physiological, psychological, emotional field is going in a different direction. And that it's really important for a person not to take on a rigid belief system, but to really listen to what their body wants right now. And if it wants to be celibate, it doesn't feel driven at all toward a sexual experience, to honor that and let that be what is, for at least the period of time that's the way it feels. I think when the process is fully matured, it doesn't matter so much. But there's just times within this process that all the energies going in that direction, going upward, trying to transform, has a different task to perform rather than procreation. So I wouldn't take I don't like to take a real rigid position about sexuality, just because of the many stories I've heard. Another thing I've noticed, I've had a number of Catholic nuns connect with me that have had Kundalini awakenings and spiritual awakenings. And of course, they are living lives of celibacy. And sometimes it's very alarming for somebody that has chosen a celibate life like that, who has really sublimated their energy. Because when Kundalini awakens, you can have very strong sexual feelings. And it can feel, many people call it a full body orgasmic experience. And it can be very alarming to someone that has separated the body from their spirituality, but their prayer life and their meditation life is so intense that it activates the energy. And then when they feel all that stimulation, it's extremely frightening for them. They feel like they've done something terrible, that they've lost, they've had this life of committed sublimation, and they don't feel that anymore. Their body's feeling something very different. So I feel like the more you can kind of open up and be all inclusive of, oh, this is curious, this is happening too, rather than, oh my gosh, this shouldn't be happening, it helps greatly. It just helps so much if you can substitute curiosity for fear. And that's always one of my foundational pieces of advice for anybody in this process.
Well, I came to the realization early on, and I don't remember exactly whether I was instructed but that there are two uses for sexual energy, like you say, procreation and spiritual achieving, let's say. And I've been through multiple periods where I was had to stop ejaculating because the effects were deleterious. And Gopi Krishna mentions that also in his books. And it's only something that bothers other people. It doesn't bother me. And as a consequence, because I was so frequently asked about by people about when I should try to activate Kundalini. And one of the guidelines that I offered was that at the moment when you no longer feel that procreation is part of your life plan, because if you do it now at the age of 25, and I get calls from very young people, and you later decide you want to have children, or a very active sex life, Kundalini may not agree with that, because Kundalini needs this energy. It needs it to initiate it, whether it's involuntary or deliberate. But it may need it even more after, because of this, the rebuilding information, the work that it has to do. Be wary of what you're trying to accomplish if you don't have some kind of a life plan and later find yourself in a difficult situation because because of that, because you didn't bargain for the fact that your wife wants or husband wants sex 3 times a week, and it's a depleting effect. It has a depleting effect on you. I remember the first time I had an orgasm after Kundalini was several months after, and I just wound up in a kind of a ball and had to eat 3 little containers of yogurt just to replenish the energy. It just felt like I was draining. Somebody was draining me, like some kind of vampire type situation. And as a matter of fact, because I've been asked that question so frequently, I wrote this book, Seminal Retention and Higher Consciousness, the Sexology of Kundalini, which was the whole point of it is for younger people who want their cake and eat it too, is to still continue to have sex, but not to ejaculate, to retain the semen or the cervical fluid or whatever is involved. So,
well, I have different kind of guidance for people that ask me about awakening Kundalini deliberately, which is really quite different. Although your insight about this is I'm sure very, very helpful, and maybe a little more relevant for men than for women. But I always tell people, if what you're wanting is spiritual, if you want Kundalini because you really want spiritual awakening, you want to know your true nature, you want to know if there's a God or whatever it is that's driving this longing, instead of focusing on raising Kundalini, focus on meditation, focus on finding the deepest, truest still point within you. And then if that happens for you, when you're able to connect with yourself, with your true nature, when Kundalini is ready to activate, it will do so on its own. It will do it spontaneously. It will, whatever level of energetic transformation you need will follow. So you don't have to go out first and work to activate the energy. The other thing I think people really need to know if they are going to take on a program to open the energy is that basically it's a deconstruction project. And you really have to be ready for your whole life to fall apart. Some of the things you're describing, for example, you had to leave. You ended up needing someone to take care of you for a few months. You couldn't keep up with the ordinary style of your life. So, if people have any trauma in their history, they need to be aware that they're going to have to work with their trauma. They're going to have to see all their shadow stuff, the stuff they might not have wanted people to know about. Maybe other people won't know, but you will. You're going to have to face yourself more clearly. So there's a really tremendous transformative issues. Anything in your life that's not authentic is going to fall away. It's going to become much more troublesome. And it's probably going to fall away. So it's in a way, it's better. It's better for someone to go into this process after they've already kind of established a lifestyle that works for them and a family and all of those things, because you kind of have, even though that identity is not the true nature, at least you know how to act and how to live. You have a structure set up. When it happens to you in your early 20s, it can be very difficult because you still haven't defined a career. You don't know how to support yourself yet. You maybe haven't found a partner. And there's just a lot more going on in our 20s just developmentally than there is in our 40s and 50s. So it's a great blessing in a way if awakening doesn't happen to you until you're older and you're more able to tolerate the things that fall away and the invitation to try something really new. when you're very young, it's a lot to go through, and unless you're in a community or have a system of support that truly understands what's happening for you. You were very blessed to find this friend in the mountains. And honestly, if there's just one good, solid friend that can hold you through this process, that's worth a whole lot. Part of my work has really been to try as much as I can to get spiritual teachers and psychologists and any kind of health workers to understand this process, because if they do and they can hold a person properly through it and let them go through whatever they're moving through without defining it in a way that looks pathological, is a tremendous gift for that person. And because we will move through it, the process wants to move us to a better place. But if we interfere with it with terror and feeling like we're mentally ill and taking a lot of medications, it can, you could say it can interfere with the natural evolution of the awakening process and keep people in a limited place for many, many years. When they didn't need to be, when they could have slipped right through it, right through those early months, and let themselves evolve into another way of seeing life and seeing the world. I think maybe we should let go of our time for today. It's been over an hour that we've been chatting. It's always great to talk with you, JJ, and I hope that our conversation is stimulating new possibilities in some of our listeners, and encourage them to return and to check out some of our books which talk about some of these topics and come from the heart.
C'est l'amour qui nous rend folles dans la vie et qui fait vivre ce mystère éternel. C'est comme un jeu entre deux, mon cher ami. Personne ne sait vraiment pourquoi l'amour soit là. Un soir, un sentiment, un regard, ce n'est qu'un rire qui peut changer tout dans la vie. Paris, c'est l'amour, un mystère éternel. Et un jeu entre deux, c'est l'amour.